Okay, well, good evening, everybody, and welcome, and it's indeed a pleasure to be here with you this evening. My name is Bruce Buchanan. I am the newly named director of the Stern Westchester program, which means I'm responsible for the operation over in Purchase, the Langone operation there. I have been at New York University for, this is year number, I think, 33, so that, when it starts being large fractions of centuries, it should worry you. It worries me for sure. But it's a pleasure to be here, and this is a very nice night to have a chance to sort of bring the community together up here in Westchester and everyone learn something. So I want to start with a few thank yous. Number one, I want to thank Professor Glenn Okun, who has given us time this evening to lead us through a case discussion. Glenn is a standout professor at the school, as most of you know if you've been there. And when we ran around surveys, people said the professor they wanted to hear the most was Glenn Okun, and we started with the best. So Glenn's here. I appreciate that very much, Glenn. I appreciate, let's see, Lauren somewhere. Lauren's in the back there. Lauren did a lot of logistics tonight, a lot of the planning. Melanie Gordon is probably seeking cover in the back, yes, so she can't be called out. Likewise, Caitlin McCarthy, way back there. Hey, Caitlin. Thanks to all of you for making this all happen this evening. I've promised everyone to keep my own remarks mercifully brief, and I'm going to do that. So without further ado, welcome all, welcome back to Stern, and please welcome Glenn Okun.
Thank you. It's nice to be here and to be among all of you. When Bruce asked me to do this, the greatest challenge was thinking about how to best spend 45 minutes. And I thought a lot about my experience both over the 16 years that I've been at NYU Stern and the 15 or 20 years before that in business, thinking about the greatest challenge faced by aspiring entrepreneurs. And that led me to conclude that the best way to spend our time was to think specifically about the worst things that can happen to an entrepreneur. And what people naturally think is that the worst thing that can happen is that they fail. Actually, failing quickly is the third worst thing that can happen to an entrepreneur. This is a merciful end. You start something, it's like walking home one night, entering your home, and your home explodes. You get up, you dust yourself off, and you move on. And so this is the best of the worst things that can happen to an entrepreneur because we minimize the excess investment of our human capital in an otherwise fruitless endeavor. And at the end of the day, for an entrepreneur, it's the investment of human capital that should be the focus of their thought process when they're thinking about the attractiveness of any idea. So to fail quickly is actually a good thing. So of course, what follows is failing slowly is the second worst thing that can happen. And of course, slowly is the operative word. So a slow failure can take 5 to 10 years. When you begin to quantify the value of one's alternative use in the marketplace, what some third-party employer would pay you for your talents, and think about a 5 to 10 year effort in which one makes the investment but never receives financial reward. For most people in our programs, and I'm confident for everyone in this room, that represents a multi-million-dollar investment of someone's opportunity cost. And when we think about entrepreneurship, often this is the calculation that people don't think about enough. people tend to underestimate the time required for success to occur, and they tend to overestimate the extent to which success might occur. So while it's a reprieve, it's often a rather expensive undertaking, which leaves us with the worst thing that can happen, what I call cruel and unusual punishment. You run a venture that survives but can never grow to the size that allows you to generate what you view as the minimally acceptable financial reward. And here, of course, the excess investment of human capital can literally be measured in decades. Ventures that are small, stay small, and will likely always stay literally too small to provide the reasonable return as set by the entrepreneur. Everyone gets to determine the minimum acceptable payoff measured in financial reward. But once we set that standard, we should be judging opportunities appropriately. And one of the critical considerations, the consideration that we're focused on tonight, is designed to help us to develop a tool that can allow us to better assess the size of an opportunity so that when we commit our human capital to a startup, we can be more confident that it has the potential to provide us with the reward we seek. And that is a focus literally on size of opportunity. If we misjudge the size of an opportunity measured in revenues related to any product or service idea, there is almost no way to recover from that error. We always operate within markets. Understanding the size of the opportunity is critical, and that's our purpose with the EndoNav case. Now, the EndoNav case portrays the aspiring founder's perspective. We're given a window into his thought process. And the case covers many interesting issues, almost all of which I intend to ignore. Since we have such limited time, while it would be interesting to talk about the founder's business plan, it would be interesting to talk about many other issues. For us, so that we walk away with a useful tool, we're focused exclusively on the entrepreneur's perspective on the size of the opportunity. The case provides us with a complete representation of his thought process. And what we're trying to do is twofold. First, accurately portray his thinking. And then second, provide our own perspective on the degree to which we think his thought process is both sound and reasonable. So the founder has a particular product vision, which, since this is the dinner hour, I will merely describe as a better scope. A scope that he believes he can design to have superior flexibility. As a designer, he has identified what he believes would be the benefits of the device. This, of course, is our first moment of class participation. What benefits does the founder believe the device can provide?
Less need for sedation, lower cost.
Okay, so first of all, lower need for sedation because of elimination of pain. Other benefits that our founder perceives. Absolutely. Reduction in pain, possible elimination of sedation as a result, and a reduced risk of injury. Those, of course, are the major elements of his thinking. Of course, what's critical is not the set of potential benefits associated with product or service in the absolute. Benefits are only relevant as they're perceived by target markets. And to be fair to our entrepreneur, he has identified what he believes to be multiple target markets for the device. What target markets does he believe he can interest in his device?
Gastroenterologist.
Absolutely. Physicians, specifically gastroenterologists, that's one target market that he has identified. What other target markets does he identify as well?
Teaching hospitals and HMOs.
Yeah, hospitals, possibly insurance companies. There's one additional target market that he believes he might be able to serve. Anyone happen to recall the additional potential target market in his mind? Well, it's actually not that. It's patients. So here are the markets that he thinks he can serve. And of course, what we always care about is the power of a product or service idea in a specific target market. Business ideas only exist in target markets as they are perceived by those target markets. So what we really need to assess is the fit, the power, the applicability of these product characteristics to these target markets. And we're literally focused on this intersection. For each of these three target markets, the physicians, the patients, the hospitals, to what extent would they perceive greater speed, reduced pain, and reduced injury risk as attractive? Powerful aspects of attraction or modest aspects of benefit? That's ultimately the question that has to be resolved. What is our founder's assessment of the appeal of these characteristics to these markets? He believes, as you pointed out, that each of these target markets should prize each of these product characteristics. In other words, that these target markets should see powerful benefit to these characteristics. Of course, it raises the question, what evidence does he possess? What evidence has he generated for that contention? Is this, in your mind, an evidence-based conclusion of the founder, or is this the founder's belief system at work? Does he actually have evidence to support the contention that gastroenterologists, patients, and hospitals should see greater speed, reduced pain, and reduced injury risk as powerful benefits of this device? In other words, were you convinced of this argument based on the case, based on the evidence he provided in the case?
Well, to some degree, because injury risk is something that's measurable, and it depends on the experience of the user.
Yep.
With the increase in injury risk, you have somewhat less experienced users who still do okay, and hospitals in particular are going to be very worried about liability for users.
Okay. So if we characterize this as no benefit, some benefit, or an overwhelming benefit, how would we make that characterization based on our founder's evidence?
Yeah. So I'll give my own perspective as a gastroenterologist myself. My brother invited me here. So I can comment on I think I can comment on all three of these aspects. From the physician's standpoint, I can tell you that speed is most definitely a consideration. If a gastroenterologist can do more procedures in a day, they can make more money, they can bill more, et cetera. So there's no question that speed, if in fact he can improve speed, which I'm a little skeptical about, would be a clear benefit. Pain relief, I'm very, my answer is kind of meh on pain relief because you can always give more drugs. The doctor doesn't pay for drugs. In fact, in New York State, the standard in colonoscopy is to knock out the patient completely. And in fact, I've talked to gastroenterologists who say that if they don't knock the patients out, they're not that happy about the procedure, so they'd rather just knock the patients out completely. So pain relief is really negligible in my mind. Injury risk as well is somewhat negligible because I think the complication rate in colonoscopy is very, very low. And if you're an experienced gastroenterologist, you've probably perforated a couple people, but really it's not you're not going to change the way you do every single procedure to decrease the risk of one injury every few years. So
Right.
I think that that's negligible.
Right.
In terms of patients, obviously you want to feel less pain, but I'm still not sure how a device that a gastroenterologist buys is going to influence a patient's decision. And I feel the same way about hospitals. Speed is definitely important, but the other two are kind of negligible.
So this is an interesting assessment in that it's consistent not only with the perspective of every gastroenterologist I've had as a student when this case was discussed. So in some instances, you get a diversity of opinion around the benefits of a product or service. Well-intended people of experience and expertise can disagree. On this one, the results are absolutely consistent. That as it relates to speed, there's some benefit specifically in the cases that take longer than 30 minutes a case, the current standard of care. And that turns out to be about 5% of the population of patients. So again, we're not saying no benefit, we're saying limited benefit in a limited number of cases, which of course you recognize has implications for the size of the market opportunity. This device can't appeal to the majority of the market, regardless of how we define the market based on that attribute. So it's fair to see the speed benefit as being of limited appeal It would have small market potential. Pain relief universally is seen as not being beneficial in the sense that sedation has an additional benefit. It's argued it enhances diagnostic accuracy because the patient can't move. As a result, the physician gets a complete inspection of the colon without disruption. And of course, the injury risk, as you pointed out, tends to be clustered in new gastroenterologists. So again, a small benefit compared to a large one. So the point very much is we had the benefit of having a gastroenterologist in the room, which I was happy to arrange in advance. Having said that, we have to turn this question back to our aspiring founder, which is to say, how could our founder have done this learning pre-launch prior to committing his human capital? Any ideas how our founder could have done this learning?
I don't need the microphone. I didn't see that he even looked into it.
He didn't even look into it.
No, he was someone who was experienced in the cardiac space, and he had a hunch, and he thought he had this great idea.
He played a hunch. And that's one of the classic traps in entrepreneurship, in startup entrepreneurship. People want to rely on their own experience and intuition when their own experience and intuition is largely unreliable. And so this is actually one of those moments. He didn't do any work, and although at first glance it may seem to be a somewhat daunting research or due diligence task, it's actually rather straightforward. First, most of what we've just discussed is available in medical journals. This is published, settled, well-understood knowledge as it relates to speed and the benefits of sedation, the distribution amongst the population of gastroenterologists as it relates to injury risk, well documented. So our founder could have done almost all of this learning by going to the place we call the library. And this is one of the cardinal rules of entrepreneurship, startup entrepreneurship. You never learn anything in the field you could learn in a library. We always want to find the least expensive form of learning that maximizes the life of our resources, which means our ventures last longer. There's a greater likelihood of success by not squandering resources on expensive forms of learning. So in these areas, the library would have accommodated most of this learning at case time. To the extent the entrepreneur remained uncertain, this is an area where a limited number of interviews of gastroenterologists, teaching faculty at medical schools, again, would have confirmed what we have spoken about. And so you should view, or I would say I view EndoNav as the classic example of a research-free startup. And of course, as a result, when anyone does a research-free startup, all of the learning is experiential, which means all of the learning is really expensive. And that's, of course, the discipline that we hope to operate with to avoid that outcome. And we shouldn't judge the founder's decision to launch the business. But it's fair to judge the launch of the business without the research. Had the research been done, and this research in particular, not particularly time-consuming, would have allowed the aspiring founder to understand that the actual market size is about 10% of his expectation as it's represented in the case. And so it becomes then a very straightforward question. Is that market, the addressable market, based on our potential benefits, large enough in terms of a financial outcome to justify the founder's time? And of course, when we're comparing the entirety of a market to a small portion of a market, we're normally looking at very different answers to that question. In other words, the launch question itself, go, no go, often hinges on this assessment of market size. So it's reasonable to view this as a very small venture, not necessarily anything other than that. And you would just hope that the founder would have recognized this size issue prior to making that decision. And of course, what we're seeing is that actually doing venture planning prior to launch is critically important. So we make informed decisions over our human capital. Now, the topic of venture planning is somewhat controversial, which is to say the activities we engage in before we launch a business, the activities that we engage in by which we decide to launch a venture are open to debate. And so there are people who believe that you launch by using sort of the Nike version of entrepreneurship. Just do it. Just try things. Just see what happens. And unfortunately, what this case shows and what generally happens is when we just do it, when we just launch without engaging in planning and research, is we tend to create adventures that go nowhere. I really don't think this fellow is particularly happy.
Yeah, that was synthetic mud.
We hope.
Synthetic mud venture, so
Then there's always this. If you think in terms of strategic planning as it applies to startups, if you don't aim, you'll waste all your bullets. You can't aim if you don't know what the target looks like, where the target is located. And that's why it's, in my mind, preferable to think of pre-launch planning as a process of actually developing business ideas. The first aspect of this planning approach, the approach that I teach at Stern in my business startup practicum class, the approach I've used with entrepreneurs over the years, is first an acknowledgement that most aspiring founders don't actually have business ideas. They actually have business hypotheses. They have a theory for which they have little or no evidence, and often the theory is based on an intuition. That's a perfectly acceptable place to start a planning process, as long as that's not the place where our planning process ends. What we actually need to do is to create business models that take advantage of those theories, business models that are substantiated by evidence, that allow us to actually confirm that we've found an approach tied to a market with appropriate substantiation so that we understand our business model can be implemented by us on our resource set in a financially attractive way. And the business model we can think of as a translation device. This is what really keeps people out of trouble. We have to be able to explain how we can capture an identified market opportunity in an attractive, risk-adjusted way. from a financial return perspective. And business model requires substantiated answers to half a dozen questions. And this becomes the framework for all pre-launch planning. 6 questions we have to be able to answer with sufficient evidence so that we have a credible belief that we have found an attractive business idea. The first question is always related to the target market. Business ideas only exist in target markets. And if we're thinking probabilistically, the greatest source of failure are ventures that are launched without any identification of a specific target market to serve. It's very hard to win customers if you don't know where the customers are or what they want. And if we understand the target markets, we've selected target markets, we can describe their preferences, and then we can understand if our product or service idea has characteristics that should be perceived by those target markets as beneficial. And these are, of course, 2 halves of one compound question. And until aspiring founders are happy with their substantiated answers to these 2 questions, there's literally no point in going any further. What tends to happen in practice is that entrepreneurs need to look at multiple target markets, multiple forms of product or service idea until they're actually able to make this match, till they actually can demonstrate they have a product or service with characteristics that should resonate against the preferences of a target market, therefore be seen as valuable. And it's only after these questions are answered that we begin to think about the questions of implementation. What is the actual resource set that would be required in order to execute that product market idea? In many instances, the inquiry ends here. A good idea that requires such overwhelming resources that the venture couldn't possibly obtain. It's the type of idea I refer to as the Fortune 500 startup idea. And many of you will suffer from this illness. If you work by day for large companies, by night you will generate ideas that are good for your employer. Ideas tend to flow from the context in which we operate. So the trick is not having good ideas. The trick is having good ideas for you. Or finding some way to capture the value of an idea that you give to your employer, if that's even possible. If the resource question is attractive, the answer to the resource question is attractive, then of course we have to think about the specific advantages we can create with our idea relative to competitors. In startups, advantages tend to not be durable. So it's not realistic to generally think about long-term advantages wielded by a startup against large competitors with superior resources. So what we're actually hoping to do is think about a series of advantages that we can execute one after another to try to maintain distance from our competitors. When they respond to our first advantage and neutralize it, we launch the second form of tactical advantage. And we repeat this process hopefully long enough that we maintain distance from our competitors so that we frustrate one of those competitors and they decide to buy our company because they can't kill it. And that's often what leads to acquisitions. Competitors try to destroy an early stage company, And if it becomes sufficiently frustrating that they can't do that, then the exit for the entrepreneur is in this form of financially attractive surrender. And of course, if we're financially motivated, we always have to translate these questions in terms of their financial implications. And this becomes literally the template of analysis. Answering these 6 questions is the research process pre-launch. We don't answer them to a standard of proof. We answer them to a degree of substantiation where we have a credible evidence-based belief for our answers to these questions. And on that basis, we can begin to think about the attractiveness of any particular business model for any particular idea. This process, by the way, tends to be iterative. And that process of iteration is not limited to those first 2 questions. So what we often discover is that a business hypothesis might be exploited by multiple distinct business models. So we're actually trying to find the best business model for us for exploiting any given idea. And sometimes people are frustrated by the idea that doing the research work to answer these questions could involve significant time, delaying launch. I hope so. That's why I created the framework, to delay launch. People tend to launch too quickly. They tend to launch on insufficient information. That's largely psychological. People are worried that a window of opportunity will close before they launch their business. And in general, extra time spent pre-launch leads to a more efficient, effective implementation of a business plan post-launch. And so ultimately, this work can allow us to think more concretely, more accurately about size of opportunity. As we can see in thinking about the EndoNav case, had our founder spent some time on these questions, he would have come up with different answers based on being forced into the position of substantiating the answers to these questions. And this becomes the tool for creating actionable business ideas. If we understand size, there are some other things we need to understand before we launch. Size is the first consideration, but not the only consideration. So to give you an overview of the full extent of what we need to understand, once we understand size on an estimated basis by virtue of answering these business model questions, we then have to think about all of the major competitive, strategic, technological issues so that we can actually think concretely about choice of strategy, which literally exploits business model, implements business model, and all of the implementation issues associated with that strategic choice. It's only after doing all of that thinking that you can begin to think in detail about the resources that are required, including the most important resource of all for the aspiring entrepreneur, time. Time is everything. The number of years we have to spend, having an accurate estimate of the number of years we have to spend is the only way we can then think about that human capital calculation that I talked about at the very beginning. And of course, if we're financially motivated, we want to find the business model and the business plan that allows us to actually maximize financial value so that the net value to us is as attractive as possible For anyone who has further information about our program, here is the appropriate email address. I am pleased to say right on time at 45 minutes. I want to thank everyone for coming and turn it back over to Bruce. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn, and thanks for being perfectly on time. Thank you all for being here tonight and for your comments, and we have yet another 40 minutes or so of time here to talk to each other and get to know each other a bit and exchange ideas, and so please take advantage of that. And then we'll see you, I hope, at some others soon to come. We're planning on doing this with some regularity. I would tempted to say monthly, but that's probably too much. Probably about 8 to 10 per year. We're planning to get some sort of a program or schedule out to people so you can know when we're going to be here and give you some sense of who's going to be here. There's a lot of very interesting faculty at the school, some who have joined us since you've graduated, and we'd like to get them up here to meet you and to present for you and to exchange ideas with you. It occurs to me in looking out there that I'm just looking at Marcia and realize that you're now in a role with the Alumni Association. Is there something I should be announcing, Marcia, that I'm not? Doesn't have to be, but if there is, I'm at a microphone and I want to take advantage of it.
I don't know if we still have tickets, but there's the holiday party at the New York Public Library in the city next Friday, December 9th.
Okay, holiday party, New York Public Library, December the 9th. Very good. Okay, I think...
Today is Giving Tuesday, so it is the perfect opportunity for anybody to make a contribution to CERN. No donation is too small, but really just to, if you had a great experience at CERN, that I think we all did, and want to continue to be part of the community and to support CERN, it's really a wonderful opportunity to give back, to continue CERN in the community and all that CERN does. So in honor of Giving Tuesday, make a contribution to the CERN Fund.
Well, could have said that better myself. Thank you very much. I will say I've been teaching at Stern Westchester since we started the program again in 2006, so it's been 10 great years of teaching there. I'm hoping that we'll do some sort of 10th year celebration of that program, perhaps in the spring, and there'll be information on that as well. So thanks for being here this evening. Thanks for braving the weather. Enjoy yourselves, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.